Before I went to the Falklands, I dealt with at least 15 unexploded bombs from World War II. I dealt with hundreds of unexploded ordnance around the country being called out, several, tens of mines along the beaches. So I was quite experienced. So when the call came that the invasion had taken place and that they were putting forward a task force, my OC, my officer commanding, Major Guy Lucas, had to fight long and hard to get an EOD team on the task, an Army Royal Engineers EOD team in the task force, because quite frankly, everyone underestimated the threat of unexploded bombs. They didn't see the need for it. Navy ships have clearance divers on board who trained as bomb disposed officers for the Navy role. The RAF have their armourers, but the Royal Engineers were left out completely, and Guy Lucas had to bang the table to get EOD, as it was then, involved. And that's how we were tasked. There was in April '82, we were all on leave, and I got a call to say that we've got to send 2 people on the task force. Who should we send? Because I was a sergeant major, I was part of the management team. I said, well, I'm one, who's the other? He said, well, you can't go. He says, you're the sergeant major. I said, look, I've waited 20 years for this. I don't want to miss this opportunity. Anyway, I convinced him that I should go. And then we decided that Jim Prescott would be my number 2. Staff Sergeant Jim Prescott, who was also an experienced man. He was available, so he would then be my number 2.
So it's interesting they only called 2 people rather than the whole squadron.
Well, yes. Now to jump ahead a few years, nowadays they deploy the whole squadron. I mean, the threat was they totally underestimated the threat, and there's little snippets of information that I was given on the way down, which just rubber stamped that for me. I mean, I was told by one senior officer, "Don't worry, Sergeant Major, if we get an unexploded bomb, we'll just go around it." And I thought, you don't understand. And of course, within a day, they were all over the place on board ships, and they had a problem.
How did you get out to the Falklands?
Right, we had a week of preparation because, as I say, everybody was on Easter leave. I just had to, but we had a duty crew. We had a crew called a crash crew, which was always manned, ready for bombs around the UK, and they were not on leave. So we used that as a team to help us get our kit together. But we didn't have a lot of equipment. We didn't know what to take. We didn't know what the threat was. And I went down to the UK information cell in Salisbury at the time to find out what weapons the Argentinians had that they're likely to be throwing at us. And they couldn't tell us. They had no idea at all. So I actually left with the information, was my course notes and a copy of Jane's Defence Weekly with the Argentinian weapons in there. And I didn't have a clue what they were going to be throwing at us. So we had little information. And that took a week to prepare all the equipment. Then Jim and I went down to Southampton to get ready for embarkation.
Was it worrying that you had so little information?
Yes, it was, because we were both experienced people, but we didn't have a clue what we were going to be dealing with. We were relying on experience. We were also relying on the politicians negotiating a ceasefire or whatever you wish to call it and turn us round. That's what we were banking on.
But I think that was what a lot of people were thinking, weren't they, on the journey out there?
All the way down, we listened to the World Service every lunchtime at 12 o'clock, with the signal getting louder and less, and it was up and down, and we were all around the radio listening to the World Service for an update, and we all expected to be turned round, but it never happened. And of course, once Sheffield was hit and the Belgrano went down, we realised that this was going to get serious.
So you went to Southampton, which ship were you...
Right, we were allocated Canberra. We were allocated a 2-berth cabin, B13, believe it or not. Very luxurious, ensuite, everything. It was a life of Riley, and we were getting silver service at lunchtimes, dinner times, breakfast time, because a lot of the crew obviously stayed on board Canberra and went back. So we had a life of Riley. It wasn't conducive to going to war, I must admit. It wasn't creating the atmosphere you wanted. But when we got to Ascension Islands, the whole task force stayed there for several days to regroup, because we'd left in chaos basically. Apparently there were some units on one ship and their equipment was on another. So they had to cross-load a lot of equipment. And it was then that we were cross-shipped to the RSL Sir Lancelot, back to the Royal Engineers. Until then we were with the Commandos and the Paras and all the
Who
rest
were living
of
the
it.
life of Riley on the
Well,
Canberra.
they were living a life of Riley, but they were running it off as
special
well.
few.
Yeah, they were running it off as well round the runway on the Canberra, which apparently was a quarter of a mile all the way around. So everybody was running daily. But when we got to Ascension, a lot of people came off the warships onto Canberra for a shower and a change and a bit of luxury. So they were drifting backwards and forwards. But eventually we were transported onto, or cross-shipped onto Lancelot with all our equipment. Now we had 2 tons of equipment, Jim and I. Of course, everybody's got their own problems, but we did get a little assistance now and again to move this equipment. But it was quite a task.
What kind of equipment was it?
Well, again, because we didn't know what the threat was, we didn't know what equipment to take. So we had to take everything. And it ranged from gas bottles, CO2 gas bottles, which are quite large, and I'll let you do the welding with the cylinders, because we had to make, if we had battery operated fuses, we would need to make dry ice, and we'd use those. So they're quite heavy. And of course all our detecting equipment, our locating equipment, our rendering safe equipment, we had to take the whole caboose. We didn't have a clue what we actually needed, so we had to take everything, which worked out nearly 2 tons. Incredible.